We arrived at Ashburn for practice on Thursday with a battle between Giants wide receiver Malik Nabers and Commanders cornerback Emmanuel Forbes at the forefront of our minds. And by the time we left, the game was potentially changed beyond recognition, with Emmanuel Forbes having surgery and Malik Nabers landing on the injury report. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's up, everybody? Welcome to today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com, here with you every Monday through Friday. And thank you for joining today's episode, everydayers. A special thank you to you for coming through every single day. Locked On Commanders is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode, on which we are going to discuss counter game planning for things you know that your opponent may or may not be game planning for against you. We're also going to talk about the new look New York Giants, where they are different from their 2023 version, at least through 1 week of the regular season, as much as we can take from it. And we're going to start off this episode talking about the changes that potentially happened to both teams in the passing game, as the Washington Commanders, Emmanuel Forbes is going to have surgery, so obviously we'll miss this game. And some more possibly, or more likely, and rookie wide receiver Malik Nabers landing on the injury report for the New York Giants. That's what's coming up on today's episode. If you want to get even more out of Locked On Commanders, all you got to do is sign up to be an insider today. Go to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders, and from there, you'll have the ability to text me your thoughts, your comments, your questions, and you will get text from me, live information from games, practices, press conferences, inside information, bonus content, and links to our insider-only Zoom conferences. Looking to do the next insider-only Zoom conference on Saturday. Time is to be determined, guys. Be a little bit patient with me. It's a very, very busy weekend, but it's a lot of fun. So if you want to get in on the action, head over to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders to try it all out for free. The first 2 weeks are free. After that, if you like it, you stick around. We greatly appreciate you. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. Emmanuel Forbes injured his thumb in week 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and is now going to have surgery. That information revealed first by Ian Rappaport of NFL Network on Thursday afternoon as we were sitting in the media annex waiting for practice to come to an end. That report comes out, and so now it looks like Emmanuel Forbes will be out for a period of time. I'm not sure how long a procedure like that will take for him to heal. We will talk to Dan Quinn on Friday, try to get as much information as we can, but I expect that Dan Quinn probably is not going to put a firm timeline on Emmanuel Forbes' return because he doesn't want to put that kind of pressure on the player, especially a young player. However, according to Ian Rappaport's tweet, he said, quote, Commanders cornerback Emmanuel Forbes Jr. will undergo surgery tomorrow to repair a torn UCL in his thumb, a blow to the secondary and for the former first-round pick. By having the procedure now, Forbes will fix an issue that would have been a problem all season, end quote. And I think that's kind of a very good point here to this procedure, right? Emmanuel Forbes had a splint on his hand, protecting that thumb, was out there at practice on Wednesday, was a full participant in practice, and Thursday morning, the portion of practice that we got to see, he was out there catching passes, working out with his teammates, things like that. So we really didn't have an inkling that anything was wrong. Like, had he not shown up, or if he wasn't out there participating or something like that, then obviously we would have kind of a hint. The assumption is probably something, during the course of practice, he went to a trainer, probably said, hey, it's bothering me, it's not really working out. So they went ahead and made the decision to have him just get it fixed now instead of trying to tough it out and wait all season long. So obviously for a young cornerback like Emmanuel Forbes, we all know, and we've talked about the struggles that he's had, and not just him, but specifically him, some of the struggles that he's been having, things like that. So you certainly don't want him out there if you can. If you can have him out there playing at full physical ability, or at least as full physical ability as possible, that's obviously better, and it's going to give him a better chance to make a positive impact. So certainly understand the motivation to get it fixed sooner rather than later. And then once he comes back fully healed, he'll be ready to go. So in the meantime, now the Washington Commanders take on the task of replacing him. And when he left the game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, there was about 9 minutes left in the third quarter, the last time he was on the field. Now, I don't know for sure, but the last rep that Emmanuel was on the field for was that pass that he got called for defense pass interference and face mask. And I mean, it's not too hard to imagine that maybe his thumb got stuck in said face mask. and that's where the injury came in, right? So potentially that's where it is again. We don't have confirmation on that right now. Looking probably to get that from Dan Quinn early Friday afternoon. But when he left the game, it was Noah Igbinoghene who came in and took over that perimeter spot. So it was Noah Igbinoghene, Benjamin St-Juste, Mike Sainristil, Quan Martin, Jeremy Chin as your primary five defensive backs. Noah Igbinoghene ends up playing 28 defensive snaps, 1 snap on special teams, finished the game with 1 tackle and 1 PBU. So in that sense, you could look at it and say, well, Noah Igbinoghene is probably going to be the guy that replaces Emmanuel Forbes. And if you're making that kind of a logical dot connection, there you'd certainly have a case there. So I reached out to, obviously we've seen Noah a little bit here in training camp, and we've seen him in the preseason. Obviously, I watched his tape after this from the Buccaneers game, and what I saw was a guy who's kind of really grabby. But again, a lot of those reps came up against like tight end K dot, and I think that in the NFL, DBs are going to get a little bit of leeway when you're getting grabby with a guy who's so much bigger than you, like the tight ends usually are. But of course, during against DBs and things like that, you don't really want to do that. There was actually one play where he got caught up physically, and really surprised that a flag didn't get thrown. To be quite honest with you, obviously Noah and the Commanders aren't going to be upset that a flag didn't get thrown, but it really looked like it's one of those plays. Where if you were a Bucs fan, you probably, if you saw it on the television screen, you're probably like, hey, where's the flag on that? But of course, those happen on both sides on pretty much every game. But I also reached out to Locked On Dolphins host Kyle Krabs, because that's where Noah started his NFL career. He was a first-round draft pick, didn't really work out, but I wanted to get his insight. And then a Locked On Cowboys host Marcus Mosher, as well as Noah Igbinoghene, came over to Washington from the Dallas Cowboys, where he worked with, obviously, Joe Webb Jr., the Commanders' defense coordinator, and Dan Quinn, the Commanders' head coach. And Kyle Krabs said, quote, really struggled with ball skills. Couldn't locate the ball with his back turned to the catch point. He's a little too leggy to transition from off, so he's better in press, in my opinion. End quote. And that kind of matches the tape. I saw him in press more often than anything else. And certainly not known as a ball hawk, not a guy who's known for, being able to get his head turned around and make a play on the ball, but just kind of trying to be bigger and be in the way type of thing. And then Marcus Mosher sent me, quote, well, he's not good. He just has no feel for the position. Great athlete, though. And, look, if you can run fast, be long, and be in the space and get in the way of the ball, obviously Joe Webb Jr., head Dan Quinn, and the Washington Commanders would rather have takeaways. But even if you can't get the takeaway, at least get in front of the ball and get in the way of the receiver securing it. But then you also have Michael Davis. Michael Davis is going to be an option. He's a free agent that came over this offseason. There was a lot of excitement about him, his potential, things like that coming over from the Chargers. A lot of people entered training camp, myself included, entered training camp assuming that Michael Davis would take the starting job from Emmanuel Forbes, unless Emmanuel just came out and balled out. Emmanuel did not, per se, ball out, but Michael Davis also wasn't able to take the starting job. And if you look at it, Noah Igbinoghene coming in and replacing Emmanuel as the a perimeter defender after he got hurt against the Buccaneers, or left the game against the Buccaneers, you would presume Michael Davis is really like the fourth perimeter cornerback on this team right now, behind Benjamin St-Juste, Emmanuel Forbes, Noah Igbinoghene. Had 0 defensive snaps in week 1, 12 special team snaps in week 1, and recorded no stats. I reached out to Locked On Chargers host David Drogemeyer, and he said, quote, everything you look for in a corner from a physical standpoint: tall, fast, long corner. He had some issues with tackling and turning his head around and looking for the football. Sounds familiar. Had a down year last year, but was really good down the stretch the year before, end quote. So somewhat similar, right, type of guys. I think Noah Igbinoghene is a little bit bigger, a little bit longer, and maybe a little bit faster at the fastest point. So I think maybe that's why Noah gets the edge there. Again, we'll talk to Dan Quinn on Friday. We'll take a look at, who's getting reps in what order in the individual drills on Friday as well, and give you as much of a report as we can in our final episode of the week coming up Friday night or Saturday morning, just depending on how late we get this done. This episode dropping Friday morning for you guys. So also showing up on injury report, we'll go over the full injury report here in just a little bit, but Giants rookie wide receiver Malik Nabers dropping on the injury report Thursday afternoon with a knee. Week 1, 7 targets, 5 catches, 66 yards, and a week 1 loss to the Minnesota Vikings. But 5 catches, 66 yards, not a terrible debut for any rookie. But so that's something that caught a lot of attention. Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants, who we did the crossover with yesterday. If you didn't get the crossover, please go check that out. A lot of good information from Patricia there on the Giants. She says she's not really all that concerned about it right now, that basically she was told it was more of a precautionary thing than anything. So it doesn't seem like it's, you shouldn't expect Malik Nabers to not be able to play. But certainly interesting, certainly something to keep an eye on. Something else interesting and something to keep an eye on, all the changes happening with the New York Giants from 2023 to 2024. We're going to dive right into those. In fact, telling you why. You're going to see a less aggressive version of the New York Giants when they come to visit Northwest Stadium, or is it Northwest Field? I don't know, Northwest something, and the Washington Commanders in week 2 of the 2024 NFL season. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find the qualified professionals that are right for the role, and that's why you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free, but it's not just another job board. LinkedIn helps you find professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role for your company. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn even knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats that they may not have the resources or time to hire. So LinkedIn is constantly finding new ways to make the process easier. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders also brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, and that's because FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. Well, we got a little something different for you this time of year. Right now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers, you bet $5 and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, as long as you have a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel that anytime. And if that's not enough for you, be sure to check out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel's Double Your Winnings for all of Sunday, September 15th, pregame money line bets. Profit Boost will be live starting Thursday, September 12th. So view your account page now to learn more about your boost. Currently, the Washington Commanders are 1.5-point favorites in week 2 against the New York Giants, and the largest spread of week 2 is 8.5 points for the Baltimore Ravens, projected to beat the Las Vegas Raiders. So go to FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. The New York Giants are preparing to face the Washington Commanders in Northwest Stadium. I confirmed it. That's what it's called. And we're talking about all of that here on Locked On Commanders. Thanks for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. The new Locked On NFL is also here. So make sure you're checking out Locked On NFL twice per day. They got 2 shows of Locked On NFL every single day. In the morning, you get the madman Tyler Rowland kicking you off with a double shot of NFL espresso. In the afternoon, you can roll through the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice per day. What's not going to be twice per day on Sunday is the New York Giants. It's going to be one time, 60 minutes of New York Giants and Washington Commanders. But what should we expect to see from the New York Giants in week 2? Well, it's a little bit hard to fully answer that question because we only got 1 week of regular season data and tape and everything to look at. But we do have some numbers. We do have some interesting tendencies to look at. Now, on offense, the New York Giants offense is led by Mike Kafka, the offensive coordinator. However, head coach Brian Daboll is an offensive coach. He is the play caller. So obviously he's the guy that's really leading it. Offensive coordinator Mike Kafka has the role and certainly has an influence, but it's mostly Brian Daboll, right? In week 1, the New York Giants ran 11 personnel. So that's 1 running back, 1 tight end for those counting at home. They used 11 personnel formations 56% of the time. Last year, they were using 11 personnel 73% of the time. So that's a big difference. Even though Brian Daboll is still there, Mike Kafka is still there, both those guys returning from last year, a very, very big difference in the amount of 11 personnel they used last year versus the amount of 11 personnel they used in week 1. And again, it's only a 1-week sample size, so you can't get too wrapped up in it. But interestingly enough, both seasons had 37% success rate. So success rate, 1st and 10, you want to get 20% of the yards to gain. So 1st and 10, you want to get at least 2 yards, right? You want to get 60% of the yard, or wait, did I say 20? 40% of the yards to gain on 1st down, 60% on 2nd down, 100% on 3rd down. Those are their success rates. So, if it's 2nd and 2, then you want to get 60%, which you can't. You can get. It's not a clean number, but anyway, so you get the point. So 37% success rates, which was 26th in the NFL last year. 12 personnel, the New York Giants used that 31% of the time last week. They used it 23% of the time in 2023. They had a 43% success rate in last week against the Minnesota Vikings, a 37% success rate again in 2023. So an uptick in 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets, right? 1 running back, 2 tight ends in 12 personnel. So an uptick in 12 personnel, a downtick in 11 personnel. Saquon Barkley probably would have liked to see some more of that 12 personnel last year, but hey, it is what it is. So expect a little bit more 12 personnel on offense than you're used to seeing. But again, that's gonna be something that's a little bit hard to really truly notice, I think, unless you're like a super football nerd like I am. They used motion on 51% of their plays last year, similar to the rate that they used it the year before. They're in shotgun 75% of the time, which is exactly how much they were in shotgun in 2023. And they used play action last week, 13th most in the National Football League. So you're gonna get a lot of shotgun, a good amount of motion, and a good amount of play action out of this New York Giants offense. And 90% of the time, Daniel Jones took a short drop back. That is a massive upgrade. So you're in shotgun most of the time, then you're taking a short drop back most of the time. So you're getting your quarterback set faster, ready to throw. And that is definitely on purpose. That's a huge uptick because last year they were using short dropbacks 67% of the time. So that's a 23% uptick in short dropbacks. And obviously it has to do with getting Daniel Jones ready, reading the field faster, progressing faster, and just having him ready to fire faster as teams try to harass him, or at least get him ready if you're going to run. You've already kind of gone through some of those processes. So that makes it harder for teams to get to him as much as possible. Even though, the Minnesota Vikings had some success in that last week. They were using gap runs 53% of the time. That's the third highest usage rate this season and through 1 week again. Last year, they only used gap runs 32% of the time. So they were usually a zone run team in 2023. This year so far, a gap run team, much more a physical type of run blocking scheme. And so for the Washington Commanders defense, now you're going to expect them to come through and try to counter that. There's multiple ways they can try to counter that. But my assumption is probably just try to get their defensive line to stick on their blocks, control those guys. Don't let them reset the line of scrimmage, and then bring your second level defenders, your edge rushers, your outside linebackers, things like that, to come up and clean up the plays and get into those gaps and be gap discipline. So more gap running. In week 1 is a big increase. So more gap runs and zone runs. On defense, this is actually where you're going to get your biggest changes. So defensive coordinator Shane Bowen is new to the New York Giants this year. He comes over from the Tennessee Titans, where he was the D coordinator there from 2021 to 2023. Last week, three-man fronts 62% of the time. The New York Giants were in 3-man fronts 43% of the time last year. 20% of the time, this front was in a 2-man front. 4 times in the entire game, they were in 4-man fronts. They brought a 4-man rush 81% of the time. In 2023, it was 48% of the time. And last week, the Giants defense blitzed 4 times, which is 15% of their reps. In 2023, 46% of the time. So you have a 31% dip in blitz rates and a near 40% increase in organic 4-man rush fronts. So a much more straightforward defense from the New York Giants. And then same time, middle of the field open. This is something that I would be really surprised if it stays, because typically against mobile quarterbacks like Jayden Daniels, you don't want to leave the middle of the field open too often. But last week they left it open 62% of the time, only 32% of the time in 2023. And they were in zone coverage 54% of the time last week, 48% of the time in 2023. So the man zone split, very, very similar. A lot more too high shell from this defense than I think you saw from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So 2 high shells, not a lot of blitzing. So expect checkdowns, expect Jayden to run, things like that. But it's going to make a little bit more sense against this defense here. Look, and a lot of that data matches, right? Last year in Tennessee, Coach Bowen used a 4-man front 79% of the time. He used a 3-man front 62% of the time. So still high usage of 3-man fronts and 4-man fronts. 4-man rush 77% of the time in Tennessee. Again, last week it was 81%. So very similar. In Tennessee last year, he only blitzed 19% of the time. Last week it was 15%, so very similar. So, it tracks, right? The tendencies from last week from the Giants defense track. And so I think you can kind of expect to see a little bit more of that. He is, Coach Bowen is getting a little bit more creative, I think, because of some of the players he's got on that defense. And maybe you'll see a little bit more of an uptick in blitz because, it didn't really work out getting home without some blitzers. So I think he's, if he wants to get Kayvon Thibodeau specifically kind of freed up a little bit more, I think he's going to have to learn that he's not going to be able to do it just organically. But it's hard to learn new tricks sometimes. So maybe at least in the beginning, you're going to see a little bit of a less aggressive defense than Jane Daniels saw in week 1. Now, the counter to that is you're going to see more guys in coverage than he did in week 1 and more guys down the field in week 1. So not as big of running lanes when he gets them and things like that. So we'll see how those things counterbalance each other. But either way, if you want to see Jane Daniels get a little bit of time in the pocket, this is definitely a defensive scheme, I would say. Now, personality-wise, like Dexter Lawrence still a beast, Brian Burns still a beast, Kayvon Thibodeau still has his potential and all those things. So certainly the Giants have some guys that can win their one-on-ones and 4-man rushes. So it doesn't mean he just won't face any pressure. But schematically, this is the type of defense that really you shouldn't have to be worried about too many exotic pressures coming in on your rookie quarterback. What about the things that the Buccaneers did well that the Giants don't necessarily do as much, but they might do now because the Bucs exposed some things? We'll talk about what Coach Quinn and Coach Webb Jr. think about that potential coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we will do that thanks to our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's the easiest and the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is you pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch your winnings roll in. And right now, one Caleb Williams passing yard gets you a win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right. Only 1 yard gets you an automatic win in September. And when September ends, that deal is gone. So there's 4 weeks total. We've already got 1 week in the books. So don't miss out on it because, again, when September ends, that deal ends. And you can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. It's a fun app to make your picks on. It has been part of my weekly NFL routine since we got introduced to them a couple years ago. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So Prize Picks, run your game. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, talking about the Week 2 matchup between the Giants and the Washington Commanders, and we're going to talk about game planning. So there were a couple of things that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were able to do really well against the Washington Commanders in Week 1 that are not super traditional parts of game plans. 2 things I'm talking about. Well, one thing is not a super typical part of a game plan. Another part kind of is, and I think the Washington Commanders need to be able to correct that deficiency. Both of them coming on defense that we're talking about just specifically here today. Not to say that the offense doesn't have some things that the Giants defense could try to exploit, because they certainly do, but we're focusing on defense for this conversation. So I asked Dan Quinn, specifically against the trips bunch. So you'll hear the question to Dan. Look, opposing teams listen to team press conferences, 100% guaranteed. Is it possible that a Giants scout or pro scouter coach is listening to Locked On Commanders right now? It's possible. It's happened before, but it's not as guaranteed. So I'm going to tell you that what I'm asking Dan Quinn about here is the trips bunch formation that gave the Washington Commanders defense fits. Now, 2 of the 4 times the Buccaneers unleashed it, they ran essentially screenplays. So, not a big deal. Trying to block it up. The Commanders did okay against it. The one time they caught the Commanders in man coverage, it went terribly, terribly wrong. And then the other time they used it against zone coverage, but didn't hit the screen. They hit Mike Evans against Benjamin St-Juste for a touchdown. So it's needless to say, they ran it 4 times. They were successful in gaining positive yards. They were successful all 4 times. 3 times or twice they were super successful. So it comes to stand that the New York Giants might use this a little bit more. Now, they used a similar trip bunch formation against the Minnesota Vikings 3 times. But again, seeing the Buccaneers have success with it, you might expect the Giants kind of go back to that well. So I asked Dan Quinn about that type of a scenario. So I want to lay the context down, because the way I asked the question might be a little bit confusing if I don't give you the context. So that's the context of the question. Let's hear the question and Dan Quinn's response.
Good afternoon, Coach. Happy birthday as well.
Thank you.
When you have an opponent, in this league, there's obviously so much like copycat ability. When you have an opponent that brings out a pre-snap look only like a handful of times, but has pretty good success in those looks against you, and then your next opponent obviously has that look in their playbook, maybe hasn't run it as much in the previous weeks. Do you anticipate them maybe doing that more because of that? And how do you balance that need to get better against kind of a minority look versus your normal game plan?
Yeah, it's a great question. Generally, what we do with the team, if there was a play that was an issue, we bring it into the game plan this week like we're studying the other team. So let's say there was a pass play given up or a run or a blitz. That's now part of the game plan to say they have something similar to this look. They have one that's this. So it's important because it's part of the self-scout. You can turn the page too quickly to the opponent and this is what they do, this is what they do. But you also have to recognize they're studying you. And so the self-scout part of it is something that I look at, like this morning I was going back through the game again today to make sure, anything that I missed, that's my role to keep pushing those things to the forefront to say this look, this play, this specific thing could likely come up again. Will it be shown in the exact same format as you discussed? No. So that's a really important part of it. Self-scout is not something that you put off till a bye week or the end of the season. I think it's a weekly part of your assessment of your team.
All right, so that was Dan Quinn, but then on Thursday, Joe Webb Jr. Wasn't really asked that specific question, but kind of gave an answer that pertains to it anyway, saying, "quote I expect them, his defense, that is, I expect them, his defense, to get into this New York game plan and make sure that the same mistakes that we made in the first week can't show up this week. And if it rears its head, because I will say this, the plays that we gave up, and the guys got to understand this, when you put that on film, people are going to test it, and so we got to make sure it's shored up, or we're going to keep seeing it," end quote. So both coaches really just kind of upfront admitting that, yes, the things that we struggled on before are things that these other teams are going to come in and game plan for, or we anticipate they're going to game plan for. And so Dan Quinn says, we come into it basically they come into it and say, we sucked at this, so we're going to go ahead and just pretend they're installing it, and we're going to continue to work against it. I think that's the best way to do it. And the reason I asked the question is because not every coach looks at it that way. Some coaches just say, like, no, we're going to do what we do. We're going to do what we do to the best of our ability. As long as we do our job, we'll be fine. The coaching staff that was here before did that. The coaching staff that was here before said, okay, you beat us with this look against this look every time, but we're not going to adjust the look. We're not going to change how we match up against that look that you beat us with. We're just going to do what we do better. And listen, I will tell you that most of the time that does not actually work. So to hear this coaching staff from Dan Quinn, from Joe Webb Jr. are saying, we acknowledge what we got burned on. We're working on not getting burned on it by doing things better, by also game planning against it for the future. It shows you that this coaching staff is paying attention, and that should be hopefully encouraging. So a little bit about coaching, a little bit about game planning there for this week as we get towards the end of the week here in game prep. We also have 2 days of injury reports to go through. So Zach Ertz didn't practice on Wednesday, but he was a full participant on Thursday. That was just a rest day on Wednesday. Nothing to be worried about there. Johnny Newton didn't participate Wednesday, was a limited participant on Thursday, and that was by design. So Dan Quinn talked to us Wednesday about Johnny and said, we're going to hold him out on Wednesday. We want him to get padded practice opportunities on Thursday, and then we'll kind of go from there on Friday, Saturday, Sunday into the game. I've already told you guys, until he gets at least 1 week of full practices under his belt, I don't know that I would expect him to be out there for game action. So, to me, that means this week is probably not going to happen, but fingers crossed, because that dude looked electric the couple of times that we got to see him. Tyler Owens, who was dealing with an ankle, was a limited participant on Wednesday, but a full participant on Thursday. Brandon Coleman, full participant both days. I talked to him in the locker room on Thursday. He said he feels really good, was really excited to get his first NFL action, felt like he was really good. Certainly had a moment of like, oh man, I'm in the NFL after the game, after his first rep, but said during the game it was just football and he was able to get out there. Emmanuel Forbes, we already talked about. Brian Robinson Jr. with a knee, full participant both days. Trent Scott, offensive tackle, full participant as well, with a knee. On the Giants side of things, the only players that look concerning for them, defensive line Nick McLeod has not practiced yet this week. Wide receiver Gunnar Ozlewski has not participated in practice, and linebacker Darian Musau has not participated as well. Darius Slayton was a non-participant on Wednesday with a concussion, limited participant Thursday, and then again, Malik Nabers popping up on Thursday, but Patricia Train of Locked On Giants says not to worry. He'll probably be in action on Sunday, which, look, I don't know about you guys, but as for me as a competitor, I always wanted to beat the best by being the best. So, if I'm a Washington Commanders defender, I'm like, bring Malik Nabers. I want to go ahead and beat you, even though you have him. All right, so that's going to wrap up today's episode. We got one final injury report coming up. We'll get some information from Dan Quinn, and we will come back on our next episode and talk about my 3 keys to the Washington Commanders defeating the New York Giants to get their first win of the season. That's the next episode of Locked On Commanders. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, all you got to do is text me. All you got to do that is go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. For your next listen, check out Locked On NFL. The Madman Tyler Rowland kicks you off in the morning, and the barber Tony Wiggins takes you back into the afternoon for some real NFL talk. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through like you do. Until next time, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.